This one is absolutely insane in the best way possible. Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. I am Molly, and in this video I'm going to be going over my top 10 favorite albums from the year 2022. Now this list was incredibly hard to make. A lot of really great albums came out this year and we had some fantastic new music. I was introduced to so many new bands as well. So it definitely took some time for me to make this list, but I finally managed to whittle it down to 10 albums that I think are just fantastic from beginning to end. Extremely well crafted creative projects that I just thoroughly enjoyed. So yeah, without further ado, these are my top 10 albums from 2022. Coming in at number 10, we have the Callous Daoboys with their album Celebrity Therapist. This album is so much fun. It packs such a punch for its relatively short 36-minute runtime, and obvious parallels can be made with this album and what the Dillinger Escape Plan brings to their music. There's definitely some similarities with the sound there, but the Callous Daoboys, they just bring this sort of theatricality almost to their music, and it just makes them have a really unique sound. It's so entertaining. Right off the bat with the opening track, Violent Astrology, this album just kind of smacks you in the face with the energy. It's such a great opening song to get this album underway. I also love all of the change-ups with the sound that this band implements on this album. In the track, A Brief Article Regarding Time Loops, I really love that part where they kind of slow it down, and then the people come in and they're talking about deja vu. It's just so much fun. It's like, it's so unexpected, and I love that they throw little things like that on this album. I also absolutely love the song Title Track. That one has a really interesting start. It kind of has this rainy, really ambient sound to it, a little bit more melodic of a track for this album. And again, it's just really unexpected, but it works so well. They somehow take all of these opposing sounds and they just blend them onto this one extremely cohesive, extremely entertaining album that I just think is fantastic. Alright, coming in at number 9, we have Dimphonic's record Horriplex. Now this is a relatively new discovery for me. I just found out about this album a couple of weeks ago, but I absolutely love it. Talk about having Deftones vibes. I mean, this album just has that amazing, like, haunting, atmospheric, kind of like whispered vocal quality that is right in line with Deftones music if you're a fan of them. But really what sells me on this album is just the atmosphere that they create on every single track. It's got this really dreamy quality to it. It's like you're kind of half asleep almost, where you don't really know if you're awake or asleep and you're kind of in that in-between realm. That's what this album sounds like. There's just this amazing floaty lightness to its sound, but then they bring so much heaviness and grittiness too. I love that dynamic. The opening track, Pond 4, just immediately sets the tone of this album, and it flows right into track 2, Judas, which I absolutely love. It's got that floaty quality to it, but then the guitar comes in toward the end and it just has this amazing heavy grunginess to it. It actually reminds me a lot of the guitar breakdown at the end of the track Beware by Deftones. And then I think my favorite song on this entire album has got to be Rain Race. That one just is so fuzzy with its sound. It has a sort of soft, like, enveloping feeling to it, but they never lose that heaviness. I don't know how they do it exactly, but even though the percussion is so airy and the vocals are so light and they're whispered a lot on this record, they manage to infuse like just enough of like a heavy, grungy quality to still bring so much power to their sound, but yet they never lose that light ambient nature. But yeah, this whole record is fantastic. Definitely check it out if you're even remotely a fan of Deftones. You'll probably love the sound of this one, and I'm definitely glad that it was an album that I managed to discover before the end of the year. Alright, coming in at number 8 on my list, we have Once Twice Melody by Beach House. Now this was an album that definitely grew on me with each listen. When I first heard it, I really enjoyed it, but it seemed a little bit long, a little bit dense for my taste, and it almost didn't really make sense to me why they released it in 4 parts. But the more I listened to this album, the more it just clicked for me. I don't know, I really enjoyed this record. It just transports me to another place. There's so many feelings that they somehow managed to pack into the sound of this one. It's a very soothing record, yet there's something kind of melancholy about the sound of it too. It just brings out a lot of emotions in me, and I love music that can do that. I think think my favorite song on this entire record is probably Superstar. This one just has this amazing fuzziness to it that, again, it just is like it's enveloping you in this warm hug, and yet there's something kind of sad and melancholy about the tone of it as well. That's this whole album for me. And then I think the disc 2 portion, like the second chunk of this album, is my favorite. I love how sparkly and sunny the tracks on this second part sound. Runaway is a great example of this. I love the vocal distortions and the synths that they use. It has a little bit more of an upbeat quality, and I just really enjoy this track. And also the song Over and Over is a huge standout for me. It almost sounds like a flower blooming. It's just so pure and like radiant with its sound. Radiant is the word that keeps coming up with this whole album, actually. There's so much light almost that they pour into this album. If you have the time, because it is quite lengthy, I would highly recommend sitting down and listening to this project from beginning to end. I just think it transports you to another place, and it is definitely a fantastic addition to Beach House's already amazing discography. Okay, moving on to number 7, we have Rolo Tomassi with their album Where Myth Becomes Memory. Now this one reminds me of if you somehow merged Converge and Cults, two very opposing sounds, and you mashed them up, you would get this album. I've just never heard a project that is so incredibly soothing and so incredibly harsh at the same time. It's absolutely like mind-blowingly fantastic. It's such a cohesive album. The dynamics are out of this world, and I love the ability that she has with her voice on this album to go from just these intense screaming lines into, again, like these really calm, relaxing portions. And the back and forth to me on that is just so impressive. The opening track, Almost Always, is such a tender moment on this album. It kind of just pulls you into this soft atmosphere. And this album was actually my introduction to Rolo Tomassi. I'm not familiar with their entire body of work. And so when I started this album, this first track, I thought they were going to be like a pop-leaning kind of dream pop-esque band. And then the album just ripped right open into the second track, Close. And I was like, okay, so we're gonna get some metal music going on here, and it just really surprised me. It totally threw me for a loop, and I love that about this record. Like, it puts you into this trance, and then it just like slaps you out of it so hard. It's amazing. I think my favorite track on this entire record is probably Drip. I love the really intense percussion at the start of this one, and there's kind of an ambient droning sound going on, and then it just opens up into like this cascade of sound. It's really beautiful. Even though there's so much intensity to this track, it's done in like a weirdly melodic way at the same time. And there's almost a sensitivity to this song, like a vulnerability to its sound that is just beautiful. I love the piano that they use too. Again, so many dynamics at play, but they just blend it seamlessly. All right, coming in at number 6, we have the Mars Volta with their self-titled album. Now, I don't actually know if this album was all that well received necessarily in their discography. I didn't really hear much about it, like positive or negative, when it was released. But when I finally got the time to sit down and listen to this album, I was just thoroughly entertained from beginning to end. I think this record is one of, if not the most accessible in the Mars Volta's discography. Sure, it might be a little bit less experimental and weird compared to their earlier albums. I'm not necessarily saying it's as amazing or mind-blowing as Deloused in the Comatorium or Francis the Mute, but it's just fun. It's such an entertaining album, and I loved it. It's just got this really casual, laid-back, kind of jazzy jam session vibe. I really enjoyed his vocals on Shore Story. They're really soft. There's kind of a crooning quality to them. Just a little bit of a different side to his vocals, which I enjoyed hearing. And No Case Gain is really upbeat and catchy, a super playful song. And also the track Equus 3, I thought was probably the most experimental on the whole album. It definitely reminded me of some of their earlier work. But yeah, the Mars Volta's self-titled album, I just thoroughly enjoyed this one. It's such a fun listen. Okay, so now we're moving into top 5 territory here on my list. So coming in at number 5, we have Yeah Yeah Yeahs with their album Cool It Down. Now, this is the band's first release in almost 10 years. Their last album was their 2013 record Mosquito, but they definitely came back with a banger of an album. I think Cool It Down is absolutely fantastic. Every track for me is a standout, and the production is amazing too. I think this album just sounds really, really cohesive and well developed. They still retain that classic Yeah Yeah Yeahs quality to their music. I don't know how to explain it exactly, but they have a very distinct sound. They definitely did not lose that on this album, but yet they took that sound and they made it very current and fresh at the same time. The first single that they released leading up to the release of Cool It Down was Spitting Off the Edge of the World featuring Perfume Genius, and as soon as I heard this single, I was hooked. I was so excited to hear this album. It just has this really epic grandness to its sound. That's the best way I can describe it, and the whole album sticks to that too. There's just something about the production of this project where it just sounds really big and open. I also really love the tracks Wolf and Burning. They have this amazing way of starting off really minimalistically and with kind of a weird sound as well, and they just build the tracks up, and then the chorus brings such an impact to the sound. And then weirdly, another of my favorite songs on this album is Fleas. To me, this record has a very mature quality to it, but this track kind of brings a bit of a playful side to the sound on the record, and I think it's kind of like a little needed break almost. Coming in at number 4 on my list, we have Thornhill's album Heroine. This is yet another album where I love the atmosphere on this one. Again, very kind of like Deftones vibes. It just has that really dark, kind of distorted, fuzzy, mysterious sound to it. It is definitely a departure sonically from their debut album The Dark Pool, which I loved, but I kind of like that Thornhill wasn't afraid to just kind of take things in a different direction entirely. I found The Dark Pool to almost be like a beacon of light in the dark, like it kind of pierced you with this intensity. And then on Heroine, they kind of just embrace that darkness altogether. They lose that light quality. It just shrouds you in this really fuzzy, kind of brooding atmosphere that is just weirdly addictive. I think Archangel has got to be my favorite track on this whole album. It just gets things going with so much energy, and it just has this really like upbeat quality to it, but then that atmosphere, that sort of ambience, they never lose. They retain that through every track on this record. I also love Valentine. This one has like a weirdly kind of sultry swagger to it. I don't know if that makes any sense. That's just always what I hear when I listen to it. It just has this kind of drawn out languidness to it that I love. And again, like the atmosphere, that's the word I will just continue using to describe Heroine. The atmosphere is amazing, and they really build that up and emphasize that on Valentine with the sound of the rainfall and everything, and there's kind of like a radio static sound on this one as well. It's just amazing. I love it. Raw is a really fun track on this record too, kind of a little bit more upbeat. It's another one that brings so much punchiness to it. And I also want to quickly mention the beginning of the track Blue Velvet to me just sounds so similar to the beginning of Sex Tape by Deftones with that really warm minimalistic guitar tone. It's so beautiful. But yeah, Heroine by Thornhill, this album I could just keep talking about, so I'm gonna just shut up at this point. Go listen to it if you haven't heard it yet. I think it's fantastic. Okay, so now we're moving into the top 3 albums of the year for me personally. Coming in at number 3, we have Cult of Luna with their album The Long Road North. This record is absolutely fantastic. I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it now, just talking about it in this video. It sounds like it could be ripped straight out of a movie soundtrack. It just has such an immense cinematic quality to it. It's a masterpiece of an album, if you ask me. There's something so incredibly cold and desolate and otherworldly about the sound of this one. Imagine you're flying over like an Icelandic landscape or something, and the soundtrack that would be playing while you're looking down at this really cold, desolate land below you. That's what this album reminds me of. It just has this amazing immenseness to it. The opening track alone, Cold Burn, even if you don't listen to this whole record, please just go and do yourself a favor and listen to Cold Burn by Cult of Luna, because this track is just absolutely amazing. It sounds exactly what a cold burn would sound like. Again, it has that really cold quality to it, like an isolated feeling, but then there's so much intensity that just like sears itself into your eardrums. It's just a fantastic starting track to this album, and it flows really beautifully right into track 2, The Silver Arc, which has an amazing ebb and flow to it between the brutality and then the really soft, more instrumental, minimalistic portions of this song. And I love the closing track, Beyond 2, as well. It's a little bit of a different style for this album, but Beyond 2 I think has probably the most cinematic quality to the whole thing. It definitely sounds like it could be taken from a movie. It strongly has that quality to it, which is probably why I love it, because I love movie soundtracks in general. But Beyond 2 is just a beautiful ending track to this album, and again, it just sets an amazing tone and it really transports you to a place. I think The Long Road North is absolutely a 10 out of 10. Go listen to it if you haven't heard it, and that is why it is number 3 on my list for this year. Alright, coming in at number 2 on my list is Alexisonfire with their album Otherness. Frankly, as soon as I clicked play on the opening track on this one, I knew I was going to just love it. It just is such a compelling record. There's so many dynamics at play here, and there's a little bit of something for everyone, I feel like, on this album. It's got the more restrained, soft, kind of melodic moments, like the track Sans Soleil. That one just has sort of a tenderness to it. But then there's moments on this album, like the opening track, Committed to the Con, that just are delivered with this blistering passion and intensity, so much energy. I think my favorite song on this whole album would have to be track 2, Sweet Dreams of Otherness. It just has this amazing atmosphere to it, of like a really big open sound. And they did a lot with the vocals on this one too, to kind of give it almost this slight echoey quality, which I enjoy. And the track Blue Spade is also a standout for me. It's got this kind of odd, like twangy acoustic portion to it, and then there's this really drawn out kind of languid quality that almost has like a slight Deftones quality to it, just with that atmospheric kind of reverberated sound. I think every single song on this album has qualities that make them all stand out as individual tracks, but yet they all work so cohesively on this one project together. Okay, here we are. We have arrived at number 1 on my list of favorite albums from 2022, and this one for me personally has got to be The Generation of Danger by Tallah. Let me tell you that when I heard Otherness by Alexisonfire, I thought for sure that was going to be my number 1 album of the year. There was no doubt in my mind. But then I heard The Generation of Danger, and immediately I was like, no, this is my favorite album of the year. This one is absolutely insane in the best way possible. The dynamics going on with this album are absolutely mind-blowing. If you threw Korn, The Dillinger Escape Plan, Mudvayne, and Slipknot into a blender, you would get this album by Tallah, but then they add a modern flair to it that does not make it sound dated at all. It sounds like a very progressive new sound that I haven't really heard from any other band. But the flow on this album from track to track is meticulous. In fact, I would highly recommend sitting down and listening to this record entirely in one sitting. Don't go and listen to an individual track because they just flow amazing together. There's so much cohesion. With that being said though, I would say some of the standouts for me would have to be the Hard Reset, the second track. This one his voice is insane on. Like what he does with his voice is crazy. How many sounds he can make with it. There's like these little hip hop flows that he does, and then he'll throw in like a squeak from time to time. Then he'll do like a tunnel scream, like this really guttural, intense sound. And then there's even like a moan on this track. It's all over the place, but like I said, in a fantastic way. The instrumentals for me just shine on the track, the impressionist, and I love that little quiet part where he goes like, that demands attention, and the track just quiets down all of a sudden before they bring the intensity back. And Shaken Not Stirred has these really visceral, like brutally intense screams, and then they balance it out with these melodic moments, and then the scream at the end of that one is just insane. I also want to mention the closing track, How Long. This one is very minimalistic and kind of atmospheric for this record, but then they build it up into the middle chunk of this track where he just brings that intensity back, and then it kind of dies down again, and the album closes on this kind of eerie, unsettling note with his whispers going on. It's just a wild ride, this entire album. It is so incredibly entertaining. It's brutal, but it's also quirky at times, and there's moments where you can kind of take a breathing period before the intensity comes back. I could understand for some people, maybe this album is a little bit too much, but for me personally, I just absolutely loved every second of it, and it is no question my favorite album of the year. So that is going to wrap up my list of my top 10 albums from 2022. Even though this list was incredibly difficult to make, I had a lot of fun putting it together, and definitely let me know down in the comments what your top 10 albums of the year were. I would love some more recommendations, and let me know what you thought of my list. If any of these albums are ones you've heard, definitely give me your thoughts on them. But yeah, as usual, thank you all so much for watching. Stay tuned, and I will see you in the next video.